Welcome to Get to the Hook. This is our second episode, and if you missed the first one, where have you been?
Right.
Just real quick, what we're doing here is giving you some fun and interesting facts that you might not have ever heard about a certain topic in music. We're covering just the biggest names in popular music, and this week we are getting into Jay-Z, even though we're not covering Jay-Z's music, which is actually part of the discussion as well. But it's more about what happened at the Grammys when Jay-Z was up there giving his speech for the Global Impact Award, and he used his time to issue a complaint about the fact that Beyoncé, his wife, had never won Album of the Year, despite the fact that she has won 32 Grammys, more than anybody else in history, never won Album of the Year, and as he says,
a big one.
That doesn't add up. When you have that many, when you win that many, but they don't give you the big one.
I don't want to embarrass this young lady, but she has more Grammys than everyone and never won Album of the Year. So even by your own metrics, that doesn't work. Think about that. The most Grammys, never won Album of the Year. That doesn't work.
So, does Jay-Z have a point? Should Jay-Z care? Should Beyonce fans care? Because Beyonce fans have been saying this for years before Jay-Z got up there and gave it voice at the Grammys. So why do they care so much? And should Beyonce feel slighted?
She should and she shouldn't. I mean, yeah, you want the Album of the Year. It is the big award. It's the best picture, basically, of the Grammys. And, a lot of people are also angry the night that Beyonce didn't win, that Taylor Swift takes home her fourth Album of the Year Grammy.
Right. So Beyonce can't get one, yet every time Taylor Swift throws an album out there, sure, let's give her Album of the Year.
And that's how it always is. And that's why it's a popularity thing, not just with the record-buying public, but with Grammy voters, which we don't really know exactly who they all are. But Beyonce's in some good company, some artists who never won Album of the Year. Elton John, Bruce Springsteen, Kanye West, Prince, Beyonce, Madonna, Rolling Stones, Lady Gaga, Kendrick Lamar. A lot of people have not ever won Album of the Year.
You have actually. I made my own list, and I had all the same people. I had Miles Davis also, which is incredible to me. And Whitney got it one year, but even that I got to put an asterisk.
A little bit of a technicality.
This was a soundtrack, and she wasn't the only person who was performing on the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack.
Oh, she got it for The Bodyguard.
Oh, it was The Bodyguard.
It was The Bodyguard.
Right. Same difference.
So some quick stats on Album of the Year in the Grammys. So there's been 66 winners, going back to 1959 was the first Grammys. They've given this award every single year. Technically, from the Recording Academy, the qualifications for Album of the Year are artistic achievement, technical proficiency, and overall excellence in the recording industry without regard to album sales, chart position, or critical reception.
Okay.
Sounds good in theory.
Already I see trouble. Because even that is just a very broad, vague, and it's almost like in their definition they're setting up, don't get mad at us if we don't give it to your favorite artist who sold the most records that year.
Right. Most popular artist is not going to win, but also it's very rare that it's somebody you've never heard of. It could be an incredible album, but if the voters don't know who it is, they're not going to vote for it. Some people get votes more consistently than others. As we said, Taylor Swift, record-setting this year, won her fourth Album of the Year. That is the most for an artist. There actually is a mixing engineer who's won 5 times. 3 of them for Taylor.
Really?
Yeah, he has the most. But for artists, Taylor has 4. Frank Sinatra, Stevie Wonder, and Paul Simon each have 3, and Adele and U2 have won twice.
Doesn't it feel like the Grammys just have the voters have their pet rocks?
Of course they do.
Like,
it's the name they know, they see it, they check it, you get one.
Right, exactly. And it also feels to me like whoever these people are who are voting, and which is part of the controversy here for the public, I think, is that, as you said, it's sort of shrouded in mystery. But it feels like they're always, like they feel like they are elevating, they're taking a piece of music, popular music, and they are elevating it to something greater. Like they're elevating it to some high art that it wasn't unless it gets this Album of the Year thing. And when you look at the people who haven't won, that's BS.
Yeah, by design, it's preposterous because you're always going to have so many great albums that never could win, and so many things that did win that maybe at the time seemed like a good idea, and in hindsight, it's like, wow, how did that win Album of the Year? And also the thing, I think Grammy voters and why the public has always sort of had this attitude toward them as being old and out of touch, they always seem to be like a generation off.
Right.
Like if you look at the early Grammys, the Grammys started in the 50s and the birth of the rock era. No rock album won until 1968 when the Beatles won with Sgt. Pepper.
Mm-hmm.
So before that, it was a lot of...
By the way, Elvis has never won.
Yeah, never won. So like the early years, it was Frank Sinatra. He won his 3 in the first 10 years of the Grammys. You had a lot of like classical pianists, a lot of jazz artists, big band kind of stuff, vocalists. The most ridiculous one, I got to play a clip from this. The Album of the Year winner for 1963, and this is so bizarre and how weird the Grammys were early on. 2 comedy albums won.
Was this...
So Bob Newhart, we all know who Bob Newhart is, had multiple long-running sitcoms over decades, beloved icon. So Bob Newhart won Best New Artist and Album of the Year in 1961 for his album The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. Okay, it's Bob Newhart. You love Bob Newhart. That's a weird choice to give a comedy album. But
doesn't that come down to, well, tell me what the 63 one was.
This is the most bizarre one to me. 1963, so this was for albums released in 1962. The Grammy Album of the Year was by a guy named Von Meter. And his whole shtick was he did impressions of John F. Kennedy. So here's a little sample of one of the songs that he won the Album of the Year Grammy for.
Now, Mr. Khrushchev, I hope you've enjoyed your stay in our country. My fellow Americans certainly wish you a safe journey home.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet you do.
Yeah, none for Beyonce, but that guy got an Album of the Year Grammy.
Got Album of the Year.
And
that was in 63?
And the funny thing about this is, too, one of the things that the Grammys do is they're playing catch-up. Very often, they kind of miss an artist when they're in their prime. The things that you'd think that they would win Album of the Year for, they don't. And then years or decades later, they do.
To make good.
So two of the artists that Von Meter beat in 1963, Tony Bennett for I Left My Heart in San Francisco, his most iconic song, most iconic album, Ray Charles for Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. The thing is, eventually Ray Charles and Tony Bennett did win Album of the Year.
Much, in
1995 and 2006.
Yeah.
Grammys, what are you doing?
Well, because they screw it up in the first place, and then when they do the make good ends up pissing off people who had put out new music and who are more contemporary artists. And they're like, why are you giving it to this person? Well, because we screwed it up back then. By the way, Von Meter wasn't the worst thing that happened to Kennedy that year. So just saying, 63 was.
Yeah.
Anyway.
After one of the jokes after Kennedy was killed was Lenny Bruce, who was a much funnier comedian, made a joke that basically Von Meter's career was over. That was oh wow, Von Meter's done. So yeah, looking at like how this is where they're always playing the catch-up thing. So it was 2005, not 2006. Ray Charles won. It was after he had died. There was a lot of sentimentality about Ray Charles.
Right.
So this is 2005 for albums released in 2004. Green Day's American Idiot is nominated. Kanye West's debut, The College Dropout. People think, regardless of what you think of Kanye now,
right?
Let's go back to 2004. Usher, Confessions, which we just saw his triumphant Super Bowl halftime show for the 20th anniversary of that. Alicia Keys, The Diary of Alicia Keys. 4 great, very mid-2000s relevant, iconic albums. And they lose to a Ray Charles album with a bunch of his friends.
The problem is, it's Ray Charles and it's a legend, so no one's going to say, that guy doesn't deserve one.
He does, but he did in 1963.
Exactly. So they keep screwing it up. They're just making it worse because they can't get it right in the first place. They're just screwing themselves down the road at some point when they do the make good, and then you're going to piss off more people.
Which means when Beyonce's 70, she'll win Album of the Year.
Exactly. So when the Beyonce make good comes, there's going to be some new artist going, who is this old lady who's getting Album of the Year?
There's been a couple times I think they actually did get it right, but out of 66 albums of the year, less than a dozen.
So let's run down a few that you think
I think.
Right. Oh wait, before we go on, I wanted to ask something. Bob Newhart in 61.
Right.
Who was he up against? Because you're right about 63 when you see
Ray Charles.
Von Meter was up against. Obviously that shouldn't have won. But I want to give Bob Newhart a little bit of maybe he was deserving.
Possibly. Okay. Harry Belafonte. Belafonte Returns to Carnegie Hall was nominated.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Sinatra, Nice and Easy, which is one of the few times Sinatra didn't win. Nat King Cole, Wild as Love. Then you got Puccini by Eric Leinsdorf and Brahms by Svatoslav Richter.
Those were the nominees.
Those were the nominees for Album of the Year. And Bob Newhart.
So,
from the beginning, what are you doing, Grammys?
Yeah.
When you've got,
It's a nice mix.
you've got Elvis and Buddy Holly and like all these acts, and that's what they were nominating. So it took them until the late 60s to finally catch up to rock and roll. And again, the Beatles,
which was
spearheading some things here. After losing to Sinatra 2 years in a row, the Beatles finally won in 1968 for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And you see the same thing now with hip hop.
My next argument is going to be that they've yet to get it right for hip hop or to do the make good for hip hop. I mean,
it's won twice.
I know Lauryn Hill. So Lauryn Hill
and Outkast
and
Outkast. Speaker Box Love Below.
Both albums were more on Lauryn's than Outkast. That there was more singing than rapping.
Right.
And so it's like it made it safe. Or the Grammy nominees were like, "Ooh, I can. That's all right. I can bob my head to this."
Yeah.
So sure.
It's got to be a little safer. The first rap album nominated for Album of the Year. Do you know what it was?
Album of the Year, huh?
The first rap album
Was it
nominated for Album of the
MC
Year.
Hammer?
It was MC Hammer. Please Hammer, don't hurt him. Who lost to Bonnie Raitt?
Well, at least they had a.
Oh wait, no, hold on. Let me double check that. I think that's not right. No, he lost 1990 when Please Hammer, Don't Hurt Him came out. He lost to Quincy Jones. It's Quincy Jones.
It's Quincy Jones.
But
so who's gonna? And even then, Quincy was.
When you think of the zeitgeist of 1990, also Wilson Phillips was nominated that year. Mariah Carey's debut album that year, and they're like, you know what, Quincy Jones, we're gonna give it to that guy. They just always seem to be off.
Do you think it's odd also that I don't know what I mean? Michael Jackson's only won for Thriller.
He won for Thriller.
All right,
that's one. So that's one of the times I think
right?
they got it right. So the undeniable ones, I think Sgt. Pepper was one. Obviously, had to have won. Carole King's Tapestry is an iconic album in the early 70s. 78, Rumors, Fleetwood Mac. It beat Hotel California by the Eagles, Asia by Steely Dan.
The fact that those were both nominated
They were trying to catch up.
Credit.
They were like, you know what, we're doing this wrong. Let's get it right. The next year, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack won. Like, okay, we're with the times.
All right.
Thriller, the Bodyguard soundtrack.
So they had a good stretch.
They had a stretch. It really fell apart for some reason. It seemed like in the 80s they were kind of starting to get it right. And, there's times like Christopher Cross beat Pink Floyd,
and that
The Wall.
Kicked off a lot of people.
But there's been a couple times. So there's a committee that they created a committee to go through all the nominees and sort of rank what should be done.
Right.
They then did a review committee for that committee, and then they disbanded the whole thing. And all three of those changes happened because of catastrophic choices for Album of the Year. Two more so than the other one. The first time it happened was after the 1985 Grammys. So it's one of the strongest groups of albums. Cyndi Lauper's She's So Unusual, which again, in hindsight, maybe she doesn't seem like that major of an artist, but in 84.
But this is right, exactly. So this is for the 85 Grammys.
It's for the 84 albums at 1985.
And 84, as we all know, is like
the best
height
year
of
ever.
Pop music. Right.
So Cyndi Lauper, She's So Unusual. Tina Turner's Private Dancers nominated that year. Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. Prince's Purple Rain.
Right.
And the winner is Lionel Richie, Can't Slow Down.
Yeah.
And no shade to Lionel Richie. That's a great album. It's a solid pop record.
But that year, come on.
Any of those other four would have been a better choice. They defined the times.
And it feels like and this is why everyone thinks that, and we don't know, but everyone thinks that the people who are voting are old white folks who are driving around in their car at that time, probably listening to a cassette, and,
they know Lionel Richie.
It's got to be easy listening. What's the closest thing to easy listening? And if it is, okay, I like it. I'll vote for that. The fact that they have a committee, by the way, that's like they had someone to check your work. And they basically would say, no, this isn't going to work this isn't going to be a good look for us. And your vote gets thrown out.
They just decide, what's going to be best. And it's this secret committee. Nobody knows who's on it, so they can't really be held accountable.
What are we, in Russia?
Yeah, basically. So that happened after 85. Then they started a review committee to go through it because then they messed it up so badly again in 1995. So the 95 Grammys were for albums released in 94. And some of the more groundbreaking, iconic albums that you've got that year, you've got Nas's debut album, Illmatic, Wu-Tang Clan, Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style would have been eligible that year.
Mm-hmm.
9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral, Super Unknown, Soundgarden. There's so many of the mid-90s when rap and alt-rock, and even people like Sheryl Crow, and these singer-songwriters.
And these
are the 5 albums that were nominated. When you think of the mid-90s and think of one of these as kind of relevant. Seal's second album, the one that had Kiss from a Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a good album. He was a current star. It makes sense. Also, Bonnie Raitt, who was good, but was coming towards the end of that run. Eric Clapton's From the Cradle. The Three Tenors, Carreras, Domingo, and Pavarotti were nominated. And the winner For
'Cause they
MTV
make good.
Unplugged, Tony Bennett. What? In the middle of G-funk and gangster rap and alt rock and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all those things, Tony Bennett wins.
I don't know who I'm angrier at, the Grammys or MTV, because by doing that Unplugged show and then putting on, let's call them legend artists like Eric Clapton and Tony Bennett, they made it cool for the voter, so the voters then feel like, oh, we are voting for something cool and hip because it's
We saw MTV in the title.
It's MTV and it's Unplugged and that's cool and we're hip. Yeah, you're cool and hip with two artists who have artificial hips, probably.
Yeah.
Like, it's just...
It's not like Nirvana's MTV Unplugged one or LL Cool J's. That I could almost see.
Because then, so Tony Bennett was 95, but in 93, 2 years earlier, they'd given it to Clapton.
For his MTV Unplugged.
For his Unplugged.
Right.
And as much as I loved Clapton at the time, at that time, I think I'd seen no artist more live than Clapton. Even I was like, really, that Unplugged thing? That's what you're going to give him? Okay.
Because it was coming off of Tears in Heaven,
Was
and his son had
the
died.
year that they gave him like every Grammy?
Basically.
Where he walked out with like the armful of
Right.
Grammys? Yeah.
But that's because they had ignored him the whole rest of his career. And like, well, we got to get Eric Clapton in here while we still can.
Right, because they were late getting to rock and roll. And
Yeah.
so... Yes.
The 92 Grammy. So 1991, you've got Nirvana's Nevermind comes out. Pearl Jam's 10. You've got Tribe Called Quest hit that year. The Red Hot Chili Peppers, Metallica's Black Album. Lots of big albums, lots of rap, lots of pop, lots of dance, lots of all kinds of cool things. The nominees. The one that should have won, probably R.E.M's Out of Time, the one that has Losing My Religion on it. Because, okay, that
would have been sort of a make good for them.
That's like a culturally important album of 1991. Paul Simon, Rhythm of the Saints, who's a legacy artist at that point. Bonnie Raitt, again, legacy artist at that point.
And one of their favorites.
Amy Grant's Heart in Motion, the one with Baby Baby on it. Now, I'm not going to crap on Baby Baby because that song is a jam, but I don't know that was album of the year
I don't
material.
know if I'm going to agree with you that as a jam.
It's a little bit of a jam.
Eric, look, for purposes of the show, I think we have to decide what we're going to call a jam and what we're going to call just a nice song.
If that song comes on, are you going to change it? Be honest.
I mean, I might have a DVD somewhere, but I would not. But I would not call it a jam.
All right. It's
nice
got a nice beat and I can dance to it. But the winner that year, and it's the sentimental favorite, Natalie Cole, Unforgettable, the tribute album she did for her dad that featured the electronically spliced duet between them.
Featured songs that were actually written 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So all those old songs, there's nothing new on it.
Right.
Not as good as everything you just listed.
Yeah.
That was new music. That was really good music.
Even Natalie Cole herself had been around for 15, 16 years at that point. And again, not a knock. She's an incredibly talented artist. She won the Best New Artist Grammy back in 75, I think. Why was she winning Album of the Year in 1991?
Is that a make good for her father?
Possibly because he had lost. He was nominated in the late 50s and early 60s and never won. So they're always trying to play catch up.
Here's what they need to do. We need someone really smart with deep pockets to design a Grammys time machine where the voters, we take the voters and we put them in a time and send them back and go, get it right this time.
Right.
This was one of the more shocking facts that I saw in 67. Sinatra wins A Man and His Music.
Second year in a row.
But it was a compilation album, basically. It was him singing some of his old hits and talking in between the songs. So again, not new music.
Right.
The Beatles' Revolver is one of the nominees that they didn't give it to. But the bigger shocking thing that I saw here was that Pet Sounds was not even nominated?
No.
How do they didn't even nominate Pet Sounds?
The greatest Beach Boys album.
Right.
One of the greatest albums of all time.
And arguably,
certainly of the 60s.
Some people would say one of the greatest albums of all time. How do you not... Like, that's one where they just got to, if they could go back and go, wow, we really screwed that one up. We screwed the pooch there. Because
the late 60s, which is such an exciting period in music. And Sgt. Pepper did win in 68, but think like 67, 68, 69, you've got Jimi Hendrix and The Doors, and you've got Motown and Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, all this amazing music. 68, when the Beatles, they did win with Sgt. Pepper. I think they should have. Also nominated that year, Frank Sinatra, Vicky Carr, who's this like old torch singer, Ed Ames, another old like crooner vocalist guy. They were just always stuck in the past.
Yeah. Time
and by the
machine.
time they
Somebody
were,
get on that. We
Yeah.
need to get them a time machine.
we should have the Grammy voters now go back and vote for what should be the album of the year for every album every year previously.
Right.
Like, it won't be official, but like, okay, if you were voting now with the benefit of history and hindsight,
Honestly,
what would you give it to?
that would actually be a really interesting show that they should do. Hey, you guys have complained about the Grammys for so much, and we acknowledge that we have screwed it up at some times in the past. So we're going to do a Grammys make good show. Here's
Here's what should have won.
Yeah, it's not going to be official. We're not actually going to hand out a Grammy, but we just want to acknowledge that we screwed it up that year. Here's how we would change it.
Right. And so many, these albums, there's a lot of forgotten records. And there's some that I get make sense at the time, like Santana's Supernatural one in 2000. Well, of course it did.
Right.
And it beat out the Dixie Chicks, TLC, Backstreet Boys. But there's some
I
you
would say
get
there
why
were
they
some
go
jams on that, though.
on the Backstreet Boys.
No, on the Santana album. There were some jams on. I mean,
There were. That's not a lie.
listen,
Be honest.
The Santana album wasn't crazy that won, I thought.
Yeah, no, but there's times where it's like you get like, okay, this appeals to Grammy voters, but it's also very much, it defines that moment in time.
Right.
Those are like the slam dunks. That's why it's weird to me, with the whole Beyonce thing, people being upset. Yeah, you just, not everybody's going to win. That is true. And she's in good company of people who never won. But I think one thing that kind of galls people with Beyonce is I think at least twice she absolutely should have won.
Beck.
Yeah, the year 2015, Beck won for Morning Phase.
Mm-hmm.
Fine album, but it wasn't Beyonce's self-titled album. She should have won. That should have been her year. But also Beck had been nominated in the 90s and 2000s, and they had snubbed him back when he was a more cutting edge, of the moment kind of artist. So they were making good to him.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think Adele's 25 should not have won.
Lemonade should have won that year.
Lemonade should have won because Lemonade was an artistic reinvention for Beyonce. It was a very large cultural moment.
Right.
25, it's a good album, and I get why they voted for it, but it's just more of Adele singing songs about her relationships. It's just like the not as good version of 21.
Right, and it sounds like an Adele record. There's nothing that was groundbreaking there.
Right.
It was good. Enjoyed it. But
and there's also like other famous ones where like what? It seems like there's such an obvious choice that would check off all the boxes for the Grammys. In 2008, that's the year that Kanye's Graduation was nominated. Amy Winehouse's Back to Black should have won. That was like a generational moment album. The winner that year, Herbie Hancock, River, the Joni Letters. It was experimental jazz fusion guy Herbie Hancock, who is a great artist and should have maybe won in the 70s.
right.
Now winning for an album of Joni Mitchell cover songs.
How do they feel that, like, there's one they can't get right? They don't have an opportunity to do a make good for Amy Winehouse.
Right. They screwed it up.
I mean, that's not their fault, I guess. But how would they know how things were going to turn out? But why do they have? Do you think it's this is when we're going through the list here, and they're, like you said, these obvious pet rocks that the Grammy voters have. Is it embarrassing to those artists? Like, is it embarrassing for them, like in the way that Adele apologized profusely to Beyonce the year that she beat Lemonade? Is it embarrassing? Do they feel like
I would think so. I think Beyonce would probably
U2
love if people stopped talking about her not winning awards, which is also insane because she has won more than anybody else. She's won 32 of them. But like the Kanye Taylor Swift moment at the VMAs when he jumped up to defend Beyonce, the Adele apologizing, Jay this year talking about how she's never won. Do you think she's like, y'all, it's okay?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure she wants it.
Yeah, I'm sure she wants it.
But
stop
and now,
making such a big issue out of it.
So she has her new album coming out this year, her country album, apparently. Right. Maybe it'll win next year. But now if it does, doesn't it just seem like the Grammys have just been bullied into it?
Right, and it also feels like, oh, you're giving it to her because it's country.
That too. There's no winning for the Grammys at this point.
So when it was R&B or soul or hip hop, whatever.
When she was doing Formation, and she was very much, when she did the Black Panthers tribute to the Super Bowl.
Then you couldn't give it to her.
No.
When she was an angry black woman, you couldn't give it to her. But now she's doing country, so now they can't do it.
They can't. But now if they don't give it to her, they've snubbed her again. There's no winning for them at this point. That ship has sailed with Beyonce. No matter what they do, they've messed it up.
But what I meant was, if you're the teacher's pet, if you're U2, do you feel embarrassed? Like, if you remember, everyone knows that kid that was in their class who was like, the teacher would always be like, oh, you're my favorite. And it was always like, I always felt bad for that kid. It was never me, but I always felt bad for that kid, like cringing every time the teacher praises you in front of everyone, because we all know what's going on.
Right.
And so if you're U2 and you get called up on stage and you win yet again, Aren't you tired of going? Or don't you just one time go, Academy, back off?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, you could stop
Let us-
submitting your stuff to be nominated.
That's true.
There's a lot of artists who've done that. That's
Yeah.
why Silk Sonic, Bruno Mars, did not even submit it because he's like, I've won enough.
Right. And
he got
knew-
an album of the year.
And he knew that they were probably going to give it to him.
Probably. Drake and The Weeknd have both withdrawn theirs. And that's that secret nominating committee that happened because of Lionel Richie and Tony Bennett. After The Weeknd got his snub for After Hours and went on the attack saying the Grammys are just fraudulent and worthless, they disbanded that committee. It's like, oh, it's not working. We're not going to do that anymore. It's just like these like knee-jerk reactions to when they've already messed up. But
Here's the bottom line. Who cares, right? I mean, I know that the Grammys, I know why they do it, and it's television. They're producing a show more than anything else, and they want all the big names in the room because they know that's what's going to get people to watch. But then they ultimately, it's like they're sucking you in to say, yeah, look at all these people that you love and that you bought their music and you went to their concerts. They're all going to be in the room. But then we're going to give the award to whoever our favorite is, regardless of actual competition and regardless of what they actually put out. We have our favorites. That's what we're going to give it to. But hey, you got to see a nice concert and you got to see them sitting in their seats. What are you complaining about?
I guess that's the artist. And you're right, like the teacher's pet thing. I think it helps create a backlash too. People certainly turned against U2 like the general public did.
Yes.
I could see them do it. Like Billie Eilish is one of the current favorites. They love giving her Grammys, and I could see to the point that she seems almost embarrassed when she wins them now.
Right.
And people could be like, enough of her.
Yeah.
I don't know if Taylor might be bulletproof. Who knows? But
yeah, I mean that's true. Like if Taylor, her next album, which is coming out later this is coming out soon, if that wins album of the year next year, I mean, come on, like
yeah. Then there's
at some point does Taylor or any of these pet rocks, like you said, Billie Eilish, do they just go, I'm not going to submit this year? Because why do you need to? You don't need the Grammy. And I got to believe, like, when they get on stage, I know everyone says, I want to thank the Academy and blah, blah. But those artists don't care. They don't need it, right? I mean, I get it if you want it once. Like Beyonce I get it if Beyonce wants an album of the year. She deserves it. She should get one. But once you've won it.
What do you care?
What do you care?
Really? I mean, and once you've won 2 or 3, which it was a funny moment at the Grammys, and somebody got called out for this. Ironically, it was 2 of the people who've won 3 times interacting with each other.
Right.
So Stevie Wonder won back-to-back years in 74 and 75. In 76, he was still working on Songs in the Key of Life, which would win the next year.
Right.
In 77. But that middle year, Paul Simon won.
Yeah.
And he thanked Stevie Wonder first for not releasing an album that year. And it's true, because if he had,
that's
we know he would have won
that's
because he
honest,
did the next year.
That's honest, at least. I just, I always think that the Grammys, I don't really get caught up in I don't care who they hand it out to. Yeah, when there's an obvious snub, I can call it out, but I don't care. The best thing for me about the Grammys, it's a concert.
Yeah.
It's a great concert where you get to see artists perform together that you might not have had an opportunity to see perform together, and that's it. I go for the concert.
Right.
When I say go, I mean I sit and watch it. Although I've been lucky enough to go to the Grammys 3 times.
Ooh, I only got to go once.
Working.
You're the teacher's pet now. I only got one. You
I
got
was
3.
working. I was
Okay.
working. But I will tell you, just the coolest thing about it wasn't even being there on the night of the Grammys. It was the 2 days before the Grammys when they do all the rehearsals. So I was sitting in the arena. This was at Staples. It was called Staples back then. Watching all these artists perform the songs that they were going to do on the. So I just got a private concert. Just sitting in the arena. There were like maybe 15, 20 other journalists who were in there, and you're just watching these rehearsals. I'm like, I'm getting a concert right now. It was so awesome.
And you get to see people. It's not a full show. I got to go in 2008 was the year Herbie Hancock won, and Beyonce and Tina Turner performed together that year. And I'm like, that's Tina Turner. I never got to see her live. That's the only time I ever saw her. But in that moment, I got to. Yeah, that's exciting. And I think if the Grammys had positioned themselves as more of a celebration of music every year, and you can give awards for whatever, give multiple awards. Just be like, hey, here's to all the great albums this year, or whatever.
Right.
Maybe it's not as exciting, not as competitive. Maybe people wouldn't care. And I know not everybody can win. But music is so subjective that no matter what they do,
right.
If you have a year,
someone's going to be.
Yeah, like looking like the early 90s when you have some of the greatest rock albums of all time, some of the most groundbreaking hip-hop albums. Country was huge. Garth Brooks was dominating then. How do you pick a best of those things?
Right.
When you are the best there is at what you do, it's pointless to compare it to things that are not what you do.
And yet they all have to show up, and part of that is the machine, in that the labels want to know that they have. It's a big selling point for the labels. They can say, we have, 18 Grammys we've won.
And it can boost sales too,
And it boosts
streams,
sales, right.
and John Baptiste, when he won a couple of years ago, was surprised because a lot
Yeah.
of people had no idea who he even was.
Mm-hmm.
Then his album's in the top 20 the next week. I mean, that can be a career-making moment for a lot of people.
Right. So what you're saying is it's all about money.
Of course it is. They swear it's not a popularity game, but it is.
I feel like we're always going to come. That's going to be the bottom line pretty much anytime you're talking about music and you're complaining about the industry. It's because the industry is an industry. They
Right.
care about money. We as fans care about the music and the art and how it makes us feel. So that's the Clash.
No, The Clash never got an album of the year. They're not even nominated. But again, I would rather be in The Clash than be Von Meter.
Right.
I
think that's a good place to leave it there.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'd rather be in the Clash than Von Meter. That is going to do it for Get to the Hook. And we'll be back next week to Get to the Hook.